Hello and welcome to Bud's RPG Review, where I give my thoughts on role-playing games, card games and board games. Today's review is Impossible Landscapes for Delta Green the Role-Playing Game by Arcdream Publishing, Part 7. In this video I'll be covering the fourth and final chapter, The End of the World of the End. The chapter begins with the famous no mask quote from the King in Yellow, and then we move on to the final chapter itself. The End of the World of the End is set in the realm of Carcosa, a place where time has no meaning under the rule of the King in Yellow. The agent's search for Abigail Wright has finally led them here, and it's from here where they will find revelation, transformation or madness, making the point that in Carcosa, the thing that you believe yourself to be and the thing you are is one and the same. We have our first in the field, stages of the End of the World of the End. Here it lays out that this is the final stop on the journey that the agents will experience, facing the surreal nightmare that is the King in Yellow, making the point that the journey here begins at the edge of the world that has no coherence, revealing ever-widening vistas of madness. Those who survive understand everything or go in the direction of never quite knowing. The chapter begins in the country of Carcosa, by the waters of Lake Harley, next to the once magnificent Yttil. Underneath the mist of the lake is another city. They will travel underneath the lake to the secret city, Hidden Yttil, a place engulfed by endless war, where the royal family resides in the palace. The agents will need to cross the battlefield around the silent city. Here they'll be drawn into the King in Yellow schemes and find a way to be invited to the masquerade at the palace. Some of the people they meet may help them, whereas others may try to steal an invitation for themselves. They will need to find a way inside. Finally, at the end of it all, they should gain access to the masquerade, where they find it filled with the elite, seeing those that they have met along the way, and as it draws toward midnight they must find Abigail Wright and discover their final truth. At the stroke of midnight, the bell will toll and the revellers will remove their masks to reveal eternity. We move on to the agents waking up on the rocky shore of Lake Harley, their minds fuzzy as to how they got there. Strange black stars can be seen in the sky where two moons hang. It is dark and there's an intense feeling of melancholy and dread that hangs over everything, along with the feeling that they're being watched. Time flows strangely, speeding up and slowing down to the point of stopping if they focus on it. The ruins of the once great Yttil surround the lake, the buildings strange and ancient. Some are pocked with bullet holes and explosive damage, and the place is dark and uninhabited. If the buildings are unobserved, they appear to shift and flicker on the edge of vision. When they leave the lakeside, they come upon the cobblestone streets, which will always bring them back to the edge of the lake. We have a disinformation section called Searching the Skeleton City, where it talks about what those who search the city will find. Essentially, agents will always find useless equipment related to their career. For example, doctors will find broken surgical equipment and bones, whereas scientists will find wrecked lab equipment and tattered scientific books. This is their mind unconsciously manipulating Carcosa. The lake itself is still, black, clear and silent. It's covered in mist that makes the far shore invisible. Light can, however, be seen under the water far below. If this is examined closer, they will see a far-off city that is laid out like a wheel. An in-times-5 roll tells them that they're looking at a still functional version of the city above that is somehow at the bottom of the lake. If they touch the lake, a mist rises and spreads to the point where it replaces the water. This is a small sand hit. There are hundreds of long, ancient boats that are abandoned on the shores of the lake that look like they could easily carry around 20 people. They're unsecured and don't have sails, paddles or the like, and are uniquely crafted to look like giant snakes or eagles. They can easily be pushed into the water. Should the agents do this and then get on board, they regain D4 San and gain +1 corruption, having felt like they did the right thing. This is followed by a disinformation section called Knowledge of Carcosa, Harley and Yttil. Here it explains that, based on their corruption score, agents know a bit about this place, more so if they've seen Henry Samagina's model of Carcosa. This is represented by a kind of handout that is to be given to the players based on their score displayed across these two pages. It's followed by an op-in section called Exploring the Cloud Lake. The moment they enter the water in a boat, it immediately transforms into clouds. The boats travel by human will, with the most corrupted agent automatically being the pilot, with highest charisma and lowest San being decided in case of a draw. All they need to do is to give a command such as go forward and the boat will start moving. This is a small San hit. The boats cruise on the clouds as if they were on water, moving at around 10 knots. They usually don't require a roll to operate, though a crisis could mean a corruption ×5. They can descend through the clouds down to the city, though they can only see about 3 meters ahead. At this point, the only way is down. Any agent who swims in the lake will find themselves falling into the fog. A swim roll will allow them to stay afloat for one turn, but after they first fail, they sink, drifting down to the streets below. They will also notice that they are not alone. There are creatures that fly in the fog. Anyone who manages to swim to the edge of the fog above the city must make a Dex ×5 roll or plummet the final 3 metres to the cobbled streets below, taking d6 damage. A pass means that they land hard on their feet, taking d4 -1. A critical means they skillfully land and tumble, taking 0 damage. This is followed by a threat matrix, whales and knife flyers. The agents will notice vast creatures swimming through the fog, whale-like things of a terrifying size, but seemingly uninterested in the agents. If they attack them, then their boat is destroyed with the flick of a tail, and each agent takes 2d6 damage, followed by having to swim to the ground underneath. In the wake of these creatures, there are swarms of airborne, shape-shifting creatures called knife flyers, things the size of a horse to feed on the droppings from the whales. If a boat has anybody on board with a corruption of 5+, then 2 will peel off and attack the boat, fighting until one of them has taken at least 10 points of damage, which will make them flee. If all of the agents are under 5 corruption, then the knife flyers get close enough for the agents to see them, which inflicts a sand loss. If they swim in the cloud without a ship and fail a luck roll, they must make a dodge or swim roll. Success means that they manage to avoid the whale as it sweeps by. Failure is a lethality of 15% attack. If they die, the last thing they see is a monstrous barbed mouth rushing toward them from the fog. The next section is called the Secret City. Once they reach the bottom, the fog will drift away, revealing a clear sky with black stars. This is Secret Yitil, a twin of the city above but not ruined by war. It's a beautiful alien place that has an almost Victorian feel to it, replete with cobblestone streets and wooden shutters. As the agents look at the city, reality seems to ripple with doors and windows, cascading and undulating like a hall of mirrors when seen from the corner of the eye. This causes a sand hit. The towers of Yitil rise above the city and the palace seems close, never shifting or getting closer, as if it's being held in place. It seems to be abandoned. A poster written in a strange Cyrillic-esque alphabet is all over the city. The language is actually Tartessian, and those who have somehow gained the skill to read it can decipher it as the soldier of Yitil is the guarantor of victory. Some of them have 3 blood-red curved lines on them, the mark of the Black Wind. In order to get to the palace, the agents need to travel through the outer ring of the city, with many of the streets being blocked by rubble, requiring them to move through buildings to get to the other side. To progress through the city, the agent taking the lead needs to pass a sand check. More on that in a bit. Otherwise, after 3 sand rolls have been successful, they enter the war zone. We have another disinformation section called Survivors and Stories. It talks about the fact that the people found in Secret Yitil have stories that don't make any sense. If enough are heard, the narrative can be summarised thus. The homeland has been under siege by the false king, and many have died or starved. The royal family remains, and even now when the kingdom is threatened, a party, the masquerade, is being thrown for them as if nothing is happening. There'll be an announcement of great importance this night there. Following that, we have an op-in called In Carcosa. This place has its own set of rules, and the very fabric of reality here can be warped by those who are corrupted. Though this power is not directable, it's very real. Should an agent desire something happens, the handler rolls a corruption ×5. If it's a success with an odd number, then 1 sand is lost and the desire comes true, though changes are localised. On a success with an even number, 1 sand is lost and something close to what they desired is found. For example, if they wanted a gun, they would find one that has been dismantled, with no tools to put it back together. A failure is d4 sand loss while reality tries to deal with their request, fails and then returns to normal. It points out that they could learn Tartessian this way, though the effect is not permanent and incurs willpower loss when done. Eating and sleeping are not required in Carcosa, though if the idea is posed, the need becomes real again. Healing does not happen naturally here, though there is a mechanic that involves sand loss making hit points return. Movement and travel is inconsistent too. They could walk for hours and end up at the start of the journey, or maybe even not move at all due to the way Carcosa shifts underneath them. Whenever movement is attempted, a sand roll is made by whoever is leading the way. They also need to say what kind of movement they're doing, such as, I'm moving toward the palace. If they fail, then they move the required distance. If they pass, they lose either 1 sand or 1 willpower due to them noticing Carcosa shifting around them, hindering their travel. Sand loss has a different effect in Carcosa too. It's lost as normal, however, temporary insanity and mental disorders are only gained back on Earth. At 0 sand, they come under the control of the handler. Time flows differently to each person, and depending on the circumstances, it can speed up, slow down, and even stop, with the higher corruption score having the most dramatic effect. Also, willpower is not recovered until they return to Earth. At 0 willpower, an agent can act indefinitely in Carcosa. Following this, we have a number of events that can happen. Firstly, it details an average apartment in the secret city. There are usually 3 or 4 rooms and have tall, thin windows, a simple washroom and a hole for a toilet. Some of them have notes written on the wall in Tartessian. Some are ransacked, others have bullet holes, and the abandoned furniture and clothing is similar to 19th century working class French fashion. Following this are things that they can find in these apartments. The first is the hidden flag. The agents find a locked door that, if opened, shows a room where the yellow sign is daubed on various media in blood and feces. There's a yellow flag that has 2 circles and dozens of black dots on a white sky hung on the living room wall. There's a dress laid out on the floor that makes it look like whoever was wearing it vanished. The next is the executed family. In this apartment there are 3 chairs in the middle of the room with blood and pieces of brain about them. This is a small sandhit. It smells of cordite and there are bullet holes in the walls. There's a family of 3 people living here, in a sense. They have blood-stained pillowcases over their heads, covered in blood, brains and muzzle burn with a bullet hole. Their features are hidden. They seem to be going about their lives as normal. Anyone who engages with them gains +1 corruption. They speak English with a Tartessian accent and are friendly. The wounds are obviously fatal, and this causes a sandhit. If the pillowcase is removed, it's a bigger sandhit as they have bullet holes through their ruined faces. After this we have the gallery. The agents will come across an artist's gallery that is filled with sculptures and the like in progress. They've all been broken down into rubble except one, a sublime statue of a young naked man that is almost photorealistic. Any agent with art of 50% plus will understand that this work is so good it puts the likes of Michelangelo to shame. If examined closely, it seems to glow from within. If an agent with a corruption of 3+ touches it, or even breathes on the statue, it flashes with sunlight and transforms into a young man. This is a small sandhit. His name is Clark, and his last recollection is posing for the sculpture for his lover, who gave him a strange drink that caused him to become drowsy. He will dress and is dismayed at the state of the studio. He's desperate to leave and find his friend. Once he leaves, he will never be seen again. We have the anarchist. In a small apartment, a young man with a wax moustache and square glasses will approach the agents, mentioning the forces of the king, the army and the palace. He will then hand them 12 sticks of dynamite wired to a clock, clearly a time bomb, giving another one to anyone who asks. If asked about gaining entry to the palace, he tells them to look for Ambrose on the pier. The bombs are set to go off at midnight and have a lethality of 30% with a 10-metre kill radius. They're difficult to disarm depending on the right rolls and should detonate the moment the king in yellow unmasks. Anybody who accepts the dynamite gains +1 corruption. Once he's spoken to the agents, he will hurry them out of the apartment whispering, "Death to the king." Shortly after, they will hear a huge hollow boom as the building is destroyed by an explosion. Following this, we have the nest. The agents will find an apartment that has been destroyed. Glass covers the floor and 3 men in red military uniforms are sprawled around a machine gun nest. They appear dead. If they're investigated, one can be found to be still breathing. He will sit up with blood streaming from his nose and mouth and open fire on the agent with the highest corruption, dying shortly after with a grin on his face. So after this, we move to the war zone, an area that is divided from the secret city by wrecked barricades, barbed wire and the like. There are roadblocks made by trucks that look new but worn. They are open air and have solid rubber tyres. They all have a red mark on the door and have small flags with the symbol of the Black Wind on them. The air is filled with the sound of distant gunfire, the dull booms of artillery and the chatter of machine guns. There are a number of encounters within the war zone. The first that is detailed is the dying man. The agents will come upon a soldier wearing a black uniform with a fez sprawled in the middle of the road. A nearby sniper is shooting in his direction. If they try to pull the soldier to safety, they could get struck by gunfire. He's clearly dying and babbles in an unknown language. Before he dies, he utters a single word, nitty-gritty, a number of times. This is the password to pass the Black Wind battle line. After that is incoming. The agents hear a number of distant explosions that seem to be getting nearer. Those with skill in artillery can, with the right roll, understand that the explosions are getting closer. Once this is understood, they're hit. If they hit the ground, then they take D6 damage. If they run for cover, they take a lethality 10% hit, but with armour of 5. If they do nothing, they take a lethality 15% attack. We then have the fire team. They're suddenly surprised when 6 men burst from a nearby door wearing black uniforms and a red fez. They have a machine gun on wheels and rifles with bayonets attached. If the agents catch their attention, then they open fire on them. If not, they set up a barricade and open fire on unseen enemies. They can try to sneak past them, however the agent with the highest corruption must make a stealth roll. If they fail, they end up as part of the fight. If they succeed, they move nearer to the palace. If they shout Nitocrati, the soldiers warily let them past. This is followed by escapees. The agents hear a strange sound like water lapping on stone growing in intensity. Skeletal prisoners in rags flow up the street and start grabbing at the agents. They're fearless and shout in an unknown language. They're looking for food. If the agents kill 10 or more of them or barricade themselves into a building, then the prisoners will fall back and stumble off, though killing these pitiful souls is a sad hit. There is the hangman. The agents come upon 6 worn-down soldiers in grey-green uniforms dragging 2 teenage boys hands bound down the street. They fashion a noose and then hang the first boy over a lamppost, shouting in German, "For crimes against the Greater Reich you've been condemned to death." If left unmolested, they will then proceed to hang the second boy and then head off. Witnessing the hanging is a sad hit for each. Next is locals. The agents will begin to feel like they're being watched, and then they will spot hollow-faced people rising from basements and cellars. They are friendly and offer to feed the agents, though it is worm-ridden bread and thin soup. They will barter for food and will agree to get the agents nearer to the palace, taking them through the sewers and emerging at the tractor factory with no sand roll required. After this we have pinned. There is a sudden burst of machine gun fire that can kill the agents, and those who take cover can spot a machine gun nest in a second-story window. Getting nearer to it requires 2 stealth rolls versus alertness 30%, or 1 athletics roll to charge, duck and weave to get closer. Failure of any of these requires a dodge roll from another attack. If they get to the nest, they realise that the gunner is a young boy in a ragged red uniform. If they kill him, they take a sand hit. If they pause, he will toss them a live hand grenade, which is a lethality of 10%. The last place in the war zone that the agents should get to is the exit, the tractor factory. All of the roads to the castle are blocked and impassable. It's littered with tanks, rubble and hundreds of corpses of Black Wind, Tartessian, German and Russian soldiers. The journey is slow and terrifying as it is littered with craters and bombs, with the constant rattle of machine guns, explosions, choking cordite smoke and burning corpses. There is a huge L-shaped building at the centre of it all, and the palace stands above it, colossal and alien. The shadows of people can be seen moving about the entrance to the building, and if the agents come within 20 metres they will be greeted with a hail of fire and mortars. To get to the blown out doors requires 2 sand rolls to move through Carcosa, with the requisite sand and willpower losses. Failure requires a luck roll with the agents taking damage or even a lethality 15% attack. Following this we have a threat matrix. Here it discusses the different kinds of combatants. There are essentially 4 troop types in the war zone, though soldiers from the worst wars in history can also be found, even ones from other worlds that Carcosa has devoured. Firstly, it talks about the Black Wind and the forces of Yttel. These are unknown in our world, and are 2 great powers that were at war in the 1920s Europe that never existed, trapped in an endless cycle in Carcosa. The Black Wind are in black uniforms and with a red fez, carrying bolt-action rifles, bayonets and water-cooled machine guns along with revolvers. They speak a language similar to Turkish, with those with some skill in it being able to hold a semi-conversation with them. As mentioned previously, their symbol is a black flag with 3 wave-like symbols in red. The forces of Yttel have red uniforms, similar to 19th century Europe, replete with gold piping, white collars and strange metal helmets along with jackboots, looking more like they're on parade than at war. The weapons are similar to those of the Black Wind and include submachine guns, artillery and anti-tank weapons. They speak Tartessian, and their flag is yellow with 2 circles dotted with black stars. In addition to these troops, there are Soviet and German soldiers from our World War II here. The Germans are most often in SS uniforms, and the Russians the Red Army. They're all war-torn and weary to a man, but they will fight no matter what. The agents with the highest corruption must make a luck roll when confronted by them. If they pass, the soldiers hold their fire for a turn and then attack. Beyond the war zone is the Silent City. As they progress through it, they see the scars of war slowly diminishing, the gunfire and explosions fading, and the streets becoming clearer with the odd figure seen walking in the distance. It is silent with smoke drifting idly from chimneys. Nobody here dares to speak to the agents. As before, the palace hangs in the air like a giant eye, with the odd flickering light seen in upper story windows. Here there are 3 buildings that are of interest: the palace, the Clockwork Factory, and the Gallery of Shades. First up is the Clockwork Factory. This is a gigantic wooden building on a pier that goes into Lake Halley. It dwarfs everything in the vicinity apart from the other 2 important buildings. It has a strange contraption on its roof, is a huge merry-go-round replete with painted horses and is part orrery with metal spheres on tracks. There are bronze faces on the four sides of it that issue steam from their mouths. When it's seen from the pier, the palace is perfectly framed and looks exactly like the postcard found at Dr. Barbas's house. Noticing this is a small sandhit. It's huge and airy inside, with high windows providing dim light and water dripping from the ceiling into pools below. Machine parts are in specific piles throughout. As they journey inward, they eventually come upon a trail of candles in bronze sticks or on top of odd clockwork contraptions. If they choose to sneak about, they need a stealth and alertness roll. Alertness will see a tall figure in a red robe carrying a Chiquita Bananas box, though they can't catch up with it. If stealth is passed, it allows them to approach the middle of the building and find the one living person here, Ambrose. A short, stocky old man with a grey beard and white hair sits in the centre of a ring of candles. He wears a strange silvery robe with no markings and has a giant monkey wrench in one hand. If approached with stealth, he can be heard saying, "Oh, you like the idea of a masquerade, do you? And we'll see what we can do about your wheel soon." If they wait a moment, the Clockwork Child rolls into view. If Ambrose notices the agent, he says in a kind voice, "My young friends, come closer." If they talk to Ambrose, he can reveal many things. If he is asked who he is or what he is doing, a human or psychology roll will confirm that he is forthcoming and truthful. He will say he's always been here as far as he remembers, and that he builds and maintains things for the king that are delivered by his friend the Clockwork Child, though he hasn't seen a living person in a long time. The last he saw was a woman called Abigail and a man called Emmett, though they left for the palace a while back. If they ask who is in the red robe, he will say he is Marbas, a servant of the king, and can be identified as Dr. Barbas, causing them a sandhit and gaining +1 corruption. He will tell them that he can't get them out of Carcosa, doubting if it is even such a thing. If they are kind to him, he will offer to move them around the city using his orrery or to help them prepare for the masquerade. Everyone here in the Silent City goes to the masquerade every single night. It's always night here, and every night is the first night. Ambrose doesn't even notice this. If asked what he knows about the palace, he can tell them that it is the home of the king, not believing that the agent might not know. If they tell him they need a costume, he will be more than happy to make one for them, using the masks and robes of woven metal that are in the factory. The masks have animal faces: a frog, a hawk, a fly, a minotaur, a heron and a dog. The eyes are unblinking, though the mouths click open and shut when they speak. If they tell him they need an invitation to the masquerade, he will be concerned. He can't make one, but he knows another way. Bringing the Clockwork Child with him, he will take them to the scribe in the Gallery of Shades. If they still have Thomas Manuel's medallion and show this to him, he'll be overjoyed and will now do anything for them. We have a box out called Asset, Ambroses Honorary. This steam-powered oddity sits on top of the factory and looks like a merry-go-round. It has wooden painted sculptures of animals such as fish, dogs and horses, all with saddles on. It allows Ambrose to travel to any location in the Skeleton City and the Secret City. He can take up to 6 people with him, but it's not pleasant. He will give them all goggles and straps them onto a saddled animal. He will then sit in a central booth with the Clockwork Child and will pull levers and shout over the noise as it speeds up. It is eventually a cacophony of steam and noise, and the outside world is a blur of colour. This is a sandhit. Movement is not detected, but within a minute or so they will arrive where they need to be. Anyone who fails their sand roll suffers vertigo and nausea for D6 minutes. Ambrose calls it a marvellous contraption. Next it moves to the other rooms in the Clockwork Factory, the preparing room and the tangle of marionettes. A massive room filled with tables, shelves and assembly areas that Ambrose attends to. He will happily chat about his duties, and he's always getting things ready for the play, and when they are ready he rings a bell and someone collects them. It then details a number of items for preparation. Firstly we have the Darabondi ticker tape, a box filled with ticker tape that appears to be the stream of dialogue from Asa Darabondi, though upon reading it, it's clearly his thoughts. This gives +1 corruption. The tape seems to go on and on and on. If it's read, a luck roll is required. If failed, they come across his thoughts as he murders a child in a bathtub, which is a sandhit. Next is the NBC typewriter, a 1952 Smith Corona that has property of NBC stamped on it. There are piles of paper nearby that are typed copies of the Yellow Phantom. Some are complete in a bundle tied with string. We have the play. A table is filled with sorted copies of the play found in the McAllister building in 1995, laid out in sequential order. There is the McAllister receipts. In a small box there are around 2 dozen receipts like the one found in 1995. They're all perfect replicas of each other. This causes a small sandhit. We have Castaigne's desk. a fragile French thing that is old and has 2 half-finished portions of sheet music and poems, as was seen in Abigail Wright's apartment. There is a desk filled with Sears satellite phones, some half-assembled and partially filled with dirt. There's a large bell-shaped glass terrarium that contains hundreds of gold bugs. The phones are absolutely identical to the one given to them by Dr. Barbas. This is a sandhit if noticed. Inside the drawers of the desk are small green glass vials that have shoots covered in leaves from an unknown tree. There is Bale's notebook, or at least 3 meticulous copies of it, all hand-drawn, battered and wire-bound. There is also a long, low table filled with small items displayed in piles, labelled as Barbas, Elias or Samagina. It contains normal items that will be found in their pockets, such as keys, wallets and the like. Any dead agent's pocket contents can be found here, as well as bonds or even living agents. We have For the Shrine. This is a huge collection of items that are duplicates of the ones found on the shrine to the king in Abigail's apartment. Some are in boxes with instructions on the outside saying where they should be placed. This is a small sandhit for those who experienced the wall in the night floors, and also for those who discovered the boxes in the missing room. There is also a box that contains static team gear, a long leather trench coat, full face mask and pump-action shotgun that looks brand new but is stamped in 1954. It also says that there are sundries at the handler's discretion. There can be clues and items that are fakes of real-world things, along with instructions on where and when it goes. Having a look around gives the agents the realisation that the room is a preparation room for their own lives, granting +1 corruption and a sandhit. Looking on the far side of the room will show it to be absolutely full of hundreds of human-sized marionettes that dangle from wires above. They're mostly naked, which reveals their porcelain limbs and internal clockwork with blank faces. At the end of the room, the tracks merge and end over an old well. The ones near there are fully dressed as things like businessmen, bellhops, the agents, and the like, and they look unnervingly familiar. Occasionally there will be the rattle of machinery, and the line will shift forward, and one of them will be lowered into the well by its strings. There's a large yellow X painted on the floor with a bell near it. If it's rung while a box is on it, then a marionette will come to life, take the box and move to the well, being lowered out of sight. This is the method that the marionettes use to travel to various places and times to work the will of the king in yellow. There is also a small exeunt called Through the Well. Should an agent climb into the well behind the marionette, then they end up at a location related to the content of the box being delivered. This could be Abigail Wright's shrine before she vanished in 1995, for example. The agents do indeed escape Carcosa, but then comes to the horrific realisation for a moment that they're no longer human. They're now marionettes under the control of the king. After this we have the Gallery of Shades. This is a colossal museum that contains the art of those influenced by the madness of Carcosa and the King in Yellow. The inside constantly shifts in shape, contracting and expanding and even vanishing when nobody is looking. The floors change from wood to marble to carpet, though the works housed here stay what they are, though they may vanish and reappear elsewhere in the building. The art is of all types imaginable, and varies in quality, though shares the influence of madness often being unsettling to experience. The influence of Carcosa is ingrained in every artist's interpretation. This work has an insidious effect on the agents. As they journey through this place, they each make a luck roll. The agent who rolls the highest, whether they pass or fail, comes under the sway of the gallery. This can be substituted for their corruption score or art skill at the handler's discretion. Every 10 minutes in the gallery is a sand test, though the sand loss is kept secret from the player. They also gain a +1 corruption for each failure. The agents are not conscious of the fact that they are slowly deteriorating to a state of madness. The only thing noticeable is that the agents spot they are becoming quieter and more absorbed by the work. Each failed sand roll gives some terrible insight into the nature of Carcosa, and the art starts making a strange sense to them. This is a slippery downward slope, as each piece of art makes the next piece more influential. If the agents decide to leave the gallery, the affected agent wants to stay, resisting attempts to remove them, resorting to violence if that is what it takes. The agent can be talked into leaving with an opposed persuade roll, with a failure meaning they can be led out the gallery. At this point the player should be informed of the sand loss, and should that put them at their breaking point, then they will be pale and melancholy for the entire time in Carcosa, being unwilling to do anything other than be led around and sometimes mentioning the art in the gallery. If they end up back in the real world, they gain an obsession with art that is inspired by Carcosa. If they reach Zero San, a dozen masked figures in dark robes appear, blocking all exits. The other agents will be temporarily paralysed. The agents at Zero San will follow the strangers and never be seen again. The paralysis will wear off and they can never find their friend again. If they decide to stay, the agent with the next highest corruption takes over being affected, with all the problems that occur with it. Also within the gallery is the scribe, an oversized mannequin that looks like a 17th century porcelain doll sitting at a desk. It holds a quill pen in one hand and has a stack of blank paper in front of it. There's an empty wooden shelf that looks like it holds sheet music. All of this is behind a velvet rope. Should an agent with a corruption of 5+ step behind the rope, the scribe will whir into life, dip the pen in ink and start writing in an identical hand to the one in Dr. Barbas's house. Internally, the machines are almost identical. Once it's finished, the paper will slide away and drop to the floor. If looked at, it will say, "Agent enter the room," and the agent, brackets name, recognises the scribe. Anything the agents will say to each other is then written down by the scribe. If the agents are smart enough to put an invitation to the masquerade in the left tray, then the scribe will lift the desk and pull out a blank invitation, writing it out perfectly for the agent that placed it. This is where Ambrose brings the agents if they ask for an invitation. He can show them how the scribe works, but an actual invitation is required. After this is the Hall of Costumes. This is an ancient wing of the gallery that is filled with mannequins dressed in all manner of costumes, armour and the like. All of the displays are marked by a placard that looks like random letters. A viable costume for the masquerade can be obtained here. Any agents who enter here alone take a sand hit and start to feel like they're being watched. If they fail, they see a mannequin move, kicking up dust. If they fumble, they take a lethality 55% attack as mannequin hands start strangling them. If they survive, then they manage to struggle free and find the mannequins like a horde of zombies clawing at them. If they die here, they become a mannequin forever. Finding them in this state is a sand hit. The last encounter listed in the Gallery of Shades is Hildred Castaigne. The agents find a large chamber that is completely whitewashed, and on every surface are birth and death dates, absolutely minuscule in size and written in fine calligraphy. The writer is a handsome man called Hildred de Calvados Castaigne. He's wearing a ceremonial military outfit of the forces of Yttel and floats around the room. All of the names are joined by hairs, familial connections, and he inscribes the threads with them. He will chat to the agents, admitting that he only knows his name and his project is to unravel a genealogy that will reveal the true king that will rule Earth. He thinks that he is the true king, but he has to prove it. If he is asked about Abigail Wright, he can find a name, but no death date. So finally, we come to the palace. On the shore of Lake Halley is the Palace of Yttel, where the king appears eternally, and it is the setting for the play of his namesake. Here is a place where the preparation, party and final revelation happens again and again and again until the end of time. They're filled with a sense of foreboding, and those that wander into the abandoned streets are never ever seen again. Partygoers, the wealthy and influential of Yttel, stand starving, dressed lavishly in costume and drunk in a queue of around 100 that stand in a line that meanders from the gate of the palace and around the corner. This happens every night, though it's always night and always the same night. The party is endlessly starting as it is ending, and the partygoers are trapped in this moment. Their costumes are opulent yet frayed in the dominant colours of red and gold. Their cheeks are hollow and some have rotted teeth, and they each hold an invitation. They react badly to those that jump into the queue. If anyone is not in costume, then the guards are called to remove them. If they don't have an invitation, then a guest wearing a chessboard costume and a mask of a rook will scream at them in Tartesian that they are traitors in service of the false king, which again draws the guards. It details a threat matrix, the Golden Lion Guards. These are described as sombre and well-fed, wearing ceremonial outfits of red and gold, with lion masks and carrying a revolver and a long halberd with a hooked blade to control the crowd. They patrol in small groups around the perimeter, and they're everywhere inside the palace and endless in numbers. Moving back to the queue, we have Mosby and Didescu. At the back of the line, these two are almost drunk, as they always are. This is the lost Delta Green agent Emmett Mosby, though he has no recollection of it and wears a ridiculous grey and gold costume with a walrus mask. Didescu only speaks Tartesian, though Mosby can translate it for him. Didescu reeks of wine and is far too trusting. He's dressed as a troubadour with a lute around his neck that makes a sloshing noise when moved, due to it concealing a jug of wine. They're happy to chat. If they're asked about the masquerade, they will say it's the event of the season and only those who are costumed and invited can attend. They will say that the whole royal family will be there: Camilla, Casilda, Uot, Thale, Nyatalba and Aldinez. If Mosby is reminded about Delta Green, people think it's a trick, though if he hears the words Delta Green, a strange look will pass his face for a second, then he will ask the agents to leave him alone or he will call the guards. Should they ask about Abigail Wright, he will refer to her as the American, mentioning that she's become a favourite of the royal family, claiming that he was one of the first to meet her in Carcosa and that he brought her to Ambrose, who took her to the palace. He will say that she is now Camilla's pet, as she will definitely be attending the masquerade and rumoured to be dressed as a cat. Should the agents jump and attack the two men, it's fairly easy as they're easily persuaded. If they are subdued, then their two invitations can be taken and used to gain entrance to the masquerade. When the agents arrive at the gate with an invitation and dressed in costume, they're searched by the guards. Weapons are removed and stored, and if they have the time bomb from earlier, this is just put aside as if it were nothing of interest. Then they can enter. Non-weapons are ignored. The agents can sneak things in, however, this is their stealth roll opposed to the guards' alertness of 55%. The item is simply removed if found. The agents then cross a courtyard to enter the palace. The queue seems the same length as it was previously, and even Mosby and Didescu are at the back of the line as before. This is a small sandhit. Finally, we have the masquerade. It is the last stop in Carcosa. It's always the last stop. It is described as the centre of uncreation, where the powerful and mad are drawn to be judged, controlled, or consumed by the king. It can only end in three ways. They can escape, though upon returning to Earth nothing is ever the same again. They can have a final cosmic revelation to their existence by opening their soul bottle, encountering the king himself, or having their cards read by Madame Sosostris, transforming them for eternity. They may even be lucky and escape. Or lastly, they may be consumed by encountering something at the masquerade that snuffs their existence out forever. They may continue as a repeater, haunting Carcosa, or be devoured by the king. It is their ending. We have an op-int called The Feeling of the Masquerade. It advises putting a 1-hour countdown where the players can see it in order to build tension. While an agent is being judged by the king, or having a reading from Madame Sosostris, it should be paused until judgment is passed. When the hour is ended, the stranger will arrive and unmask himself as the king in yellow. Anyone still there are eternally trapped, and any agent that is still there knows the final outcome. It describes the sense of fascination here. The ballroom, the dancing, the costumes move and flow in a hypnotic fashion. An agent who makes an in-times-5 roll can see this but shake it off. Failure means they are transfixed until snapped out of it by another agent. There are familiar faces, well, almost familiar, behind demi-masks with eyes of judgment and jealousy. Anybody in the campaign could be here, including an agent's bonds, waiting for midnight. There are also secrets, hushed talk among the rich and influential, and any questions on the horrors unleashed. Time has no place here. The agent can learn all the secrets in this book. After this, it moves to the ballroom. It is massive, immaculate and baroque, and the amount of people here can't be determined, though it seems packed to the rafters. It's impossible to count due to the number of masks, people and other distractions. The place is covered with interesting artistic flourishes to fascinate, and each time they move around they discover something else wonderful and interesting. Everything relates to the king in some respect, and the agents may even see people, art and places in the artwork that they have seen before. This is to reinforce the helplessness of their situation. Partygoers are beautifully dressed in finery and demi-masks. If the agents are dressed in costumes from Ambroses' gallery, then people whisper behind their hands and cast sideways glances. A few people stand out. First is Madame Sosostris. She is an old woman dressed in black that sits on a divan near the entrance. She can be recognised as Lady Triumphi from Broadalbin. She is attended by a blank-faced man, possibly her son, and is flanked by a crowd. She will slowly and carefully reveal her tarot. If the agent must learn, she dismisses the one she is currently reading for and tells the agent to sit to come and see the cards. More on that in a bit. The next is the royal family. They stand aloof on a bier, surrounded by golden line guards. The sisters, Casilda and Camilla, are there, as are Thael and Aldonas, wearing military uniforms of Yttil. Uot and now Talba wear white robes and black masks, and in the centre is an empty golden throne. They smile thinly at the crowd. If the agent approached, the guards block them. And finally, after all the time and effort trying to track her down, there is Abigail Wright. She is dressed in a blue ball gown with a cat mask. She stands at the bottom of the bier watching the crowd. If she spots the agents, she rushes over and pulls them aside. She knows everything they have experienced to arrive here and shows empathy and is consoling to them. She seems completely serene. She can tell them any fact from Impossible Landscapes, but tells them that they must leave before the king comes. She can hint as to who they need to see or where to go to find an exit. She knows everything about everyone. If they show her J.C. Linds's soul bottle, she will try to hide it and tells them to find him and give him his bottle. If asked to come with them, she declines, seeming sad, asking them to look after her father and to tell Thomas that she loves him. If Thomas Wright is present here, then this should be played out. If the agents try to drag her away by force, guards appear and they're overwhelmed. Wright will then never be seen again by the agents. He details the author, J.C. Lynns. He is a tall, middle-aged man wearing an old suit and a mechanical raven mask, clearly one of Ambroses' creations if they've met him. He carries an old Remington remote typewriter, and he will introduce himself as a scribbler by trade, and will chat about art and writing, saying that he is out of ideas and on the skids. He will happily talk about where he has been and who he has seen, and will confess to an agent who he sees as an author or criminal that he was a bank robber and drug dealer once, and he is on the run. He feels certain that he has a great book in him, but doesn't know where to begin. If they give him his bottle, then that changes. As with last things being last, we have the king himself. He is described as being present by his absence, with chatter and hushed tones of his arrival. Those at corruption of 7+ can see him in the shadows of the room, and can point him out to others who can then increase their corruption to 7. A huge figure with a plain white face in gold and silver. If spotted, then an agent will instantly know that approaching him is a mistake, and that even looking at him is painful. If they force themselves to look at him, then they take a sand hit, which if failed renders them incapable of movement for d6 turns, and while in the king's presence, all rolls except San are at -20%. Ultimately, all of the agents confront the king in yellow at the masquerade, open their soul bottle, or achieve some kind of enlightenment, with all being judged as individuals. The handler should consider the agent's corruption. The higher it is, the more they delve deeper to find answers, and the higher their chance of being consumed. In the end, appropriate endings should be crafted for each agent. Nobody truly escapes. Another outcome will find them. We have a number of revelations. The first is the handoff. Should the agents give J.C. Lynns his soul bottle, he is delighted. He puts his typewriter down and pops it open and listens. He smiles and then says, "I know the story I need to write." Discarding the bottle and picking up his typewriter, he will grab the agent by the shoulder and say, "Along the shore, the cloud waves break, the twin suns sink behind the lake, the shadows lengthen in Carcosa." He then laughs and vanishes into the crowd. The agent will then lose d6 or d20 San as they realise that they have just given birth to the king in yellow. The second is curtains. The king in yellow will appear to an agent lunging at them. They are allowed a single dodge. If they pass, the king rushes past them with a smell of rotten flesh and cinnamon. The agent will have another conclusion later. If they fail their dodge, then the cloak of the king engulfs them. They will then realise that they are not in the palace, but on a stage performing for a silent audience. They will lose d6 or d20 San. Other actors are there staring at them, waiting, but the agent is struck mute and none of the words make any sense. Outside is New York in 1955. This is another San hit. The theatre marquee reads, "Spur Oelm Sispo," and at that point, every word they say or hear is nonsense. Inside their own head, they are coherent. The agent is eventually put into a mental institution. A kind nurse will say, "We have no name for you, dear. I'll put you down as Sunshine. Isn't that nice?" They may have already met themselves in Dorchester House, though they can't tell themselves what awaits them. The next is the one true king. The king will appear in a crowd and will turn to consider an agent and then remove his mask to them. They lose d10 or d100 San. If they hit 0, the king places his mask on the agent, and then the agent is gone and only the king remains. If they survive, they wake up on Earth with the megalomania affliction, proclaiming that they are the king in yellow, but that it must be kept secret. They can never be cured. The next is the whole time. The agent will wake up from a strange dream about a masquerade. They're in Dorchester House and are being dragged from their seat by Mr. Ed, who straps them screaming to a gurney and puts a ball gag in their mouth. Dr. Friend enters, smiling, and takes out 2 huge hypodermic needles, one empty and the other filled with black fluid, an ice pick, and a mallet. He will then proceed to extract the patsu from the agent and then perform something akin to a lobotomy, which is a San hit, but inserts the needle with the black fluid into the cavity and injects it into the new hole. This fills the agent's mind with horrific images that hit them like a seizure. When the convulsions abate, they are untied and Dr. Friend will draw up a chair and say, "Go on." They will then recite the king in yellow to the doctor for eternity, forever trapped in the night world of Dorchester House. This is followed by consumption, eaten. The king will appear to an agent, rising from the floor like a horrific spectre, growing and growing until it reaches the ceiling. They lose d10 or d100 San. If they can't flee due to the king's presence, a rotted massive hand that smells of cinnamon will grab them and draw them up to the pale mask of the king. The mask will open, revealing an ivory throat filled with shark-like teeth, and then they are consumed, lost for eternity. Anybody watching this sees the agent shrink and the king scoop them up and devour them in a single gulp. This is a SAN hit as well as the SAN loss for seeing the death of an agent. The next is consumption, I see. The agent is grappled by the king and his black eye holes fill with a light that renders them blind. They lose D8 or D20 SAN, and then after a moment, their sight returns. Everyone is gone, and then they permanently suffer from a delusion, though I can hear people I cannot see them. If they hit 0 SAN, then the light engulfs them and they vanish forever. After this is the final consumption, my bottle. The king in yellow appears and hands the agent their own soul bottle before disappearing into the crowd. Their name is inscribed on a bronze plate, and underneath it, scraped into the glass, is the word escape. Any agent who opens their bottle loses D10 or D100 SAN as they hear the whisper, the play exists to make itself, and in doing so it makes the world. If they have at least 1 SAN left, they gain D12 and lose 5 corruption, though it can never go below 5. If they survive, they wake up on Earth afflicted with paranoia that can never be cured. If they hit 0, then they stay forever as a partygoer at the masquerade. It then goes on to escapes. It's worth mentioning that in each case, escape is only possible after giving JC Lynns his soul bottle. The first is into the wall of books. Any agents who have seen the library in Dorchester House can recognise the distinctive pattern of book bindings on a shelf in the palace. If they start removing the books, they can dig through a tunnel of books that causes a SAN hit. It will eventually lead to Dorchester House Library, and from that point they will need to escape again through the night world, back to Earth, and can never return to Carcosa. They regain D20 SAN. The next escape is a trail of cards. Madame Sesostris will shuffle her tarot in an impressive hypnotic display and finally spray the cards at the face of the agent in such a sudden manner that they will stumble backwards. When they regain their composure, they're alone in the room. Everyone else is gone. There's a trail of tarot cards that leads to the palace and eventually to a small uneven door. If they go through this door, they end up in the basement of the bookshop. They have escaped Carcosa and gained D20 SAN. The last escape is into the night floors. An agent will recognise a room, an NPC or piece of architecture that they may have seen there, maybe spotting books in an antechamber that looks like Michelle Vanfitz's apartment, or even the waiter that served the strange hors d'oeuvres in the night floors rushing off towards a side door. If they head towards this, the dread of the ballroom starts fading. If they hesitate, they need to make a Dex ×5, Athletics or SAN roll to leap through, or they are consumed by the palace. If they make it, the ballroom vanishes. They're back on the night floors and must find their way back to Earth. They have one encounter before they leave. They may even see themselves 20 years earlier on the trail of Abigail Wright. This is a SAN hit and they can never communicate with themselves. If they escape, they end up back on Earth and gain D20 SAN. The next section is called Return. Those who survive the masquerade and return to Earth are never the same. They've enabled the play's creation and are trapped in a fate they've created. They will also gain a temporary insanity as the lasting effects of Carcosa hit them. Anybody who hit breaking point gains a new incurable obsession. I must never speak of the King in Yellow. If they hit it twice, they also gain a further disorder from a small appropriate list. Despite these lasting effects, there is no further pursuit by the King in Yellow. They can spend their days counting down to the time when they will see the King again. Finally, above all else, we have midnight. Those that are still at the party for more than 1 hour experience the close to the King in Yellow. They are now lost, but will have one spectacle before then. The agents can finally see the universe as it is. The stranger will unmask as the king. Black-suited attendants will sweep in with smiles on their faces and move the agents to new positions. They can't resist. The time bombs were simply props. They're stripped and redressed in stage clothing and makeup was put on them. They're then led through various rooms and hallways and eventually to a massive stage. Mosby will appear, looking at the script, and whisper a line to them over and over again that is brief and nonsensical. The curtain will rise and the set is an apartment filled with random items. The audience will be revealed as every person they've encountered in the campaign. They applaud. The agents find themselves dressed roughly as they were when they met in 1995 to investigate the disappearance of Abigail Wright until the end of creation. Just off the stage, Mosby mouths the line and twirls his finger. The agent realises it is what they said long ago. The close of the campaign is the handle reading to the players. And so we come to our end of sorts, a play that contains multitudes, all who died, all who live, and who yet shall, upon this stage with us forever. Curtain. Lastly, we have the stats for the Night Flyers, Palace Guards, and Warzone competence. Okay, that concludes not only the End of the World at the End, but indeed the campaign. Part 8 will be the final video in the series where I talk about the appendix, entities and artifacts, take a look at the add-on book for the series, Static Protocol, and give my final thoughts on the campaign.